I think good digital transformation is about enabling people to do things in a different way. So starting off with sort of the mission or purpose of your organization, looking at that, identifying things that people say are the worst part of their day. Everybody should be able to answer that question. What have you come home and you complain to your other half or a friend about? Digital transformation solves those challenges.
Hello and welcome back to the Hypercube Podcast. I am joined today by Nic Granger, who is Chief Information and Financial Officer for the North Sea Transition Authority. Nic, thank you very much for joining us here today. For those of the audience that maybe don't know you or don't know NSTA, would you like to just give us a brief intro?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Adam. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Nic Granger. I am Chief Information and Financial Officer of the North Sea Transition Authority, as Adam has said. NSTA, if you haven't come across us, we regulate and influence elements of offshore energy. So that's oil and gas, carbon storage, and hydrogen transportation. And our role is essentially to steward the industry through certain milestones in the life cycle. At the moment, we've got three key priorities in doing that. Firstly, to ensure energy security and production. Secondly, to reduce emissions to decarbonize that supply as much as possible. And then thirdly, to accelerate the energy transition to net zero.
I mean, NSTA is really interesting because you're in this unusual position of like regulator, innovation body. Like, talk me a little bit about how that plays out in practice and how, like organizations like NSTA can really accelerate collaboration within the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a regulator, we've always taken a little bit of a different approach to perhaps some of the traditional regulatory bodies that you kind of come across. As part of that, we've put data at the heart of what we do. We know the data can add value, and I think that sums up our approach across regulation. So we're here to steward the industry through those steps that they need to go through in terms of their licenses, and we do that in a way that adds value to UK PLC. We have a balance between the kind of the carrot and the stick. We're a regulator at the core, so we need to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but we also want to make sure that we're doing that in the way that adds value as opposed to purely being a compliance organization.
Yeah, and I guess like it's an industry where there's no one size fits all kind of cookie cutter data strategy or digital transformation template, right? Like it's a complex space.
Absolutely. And I think some of the challenges, so the organizations working in the UKCS are quite often international, and they are headquartered around the world. So that also adds another layer in terms of approaches for digital and data. Quite often we're working with a team that might not be the head office, that might not be setting those strategies and approaches, but what we're trying to do is make sure that there is a consistent approach. We've put legislation in place that enables us to do that and work with industry to collect data and make it available for wider use across the UK and internationally as well.
And so just like, because you've not always been in energy, right? You started in IT, you've worked in finance, accountancy. How did that, like, talk a little bit about your career journey and what kind of led you here? Because I think it's a really interesting story, and some of the stuff you've achieved over the last few years has been really fun to follow.
Yeah, sure. And I know I'm a little bit different, having that kind of the combination of the IT data and transformation and the finance side of things. So I kind of started off with an IT degree, couldn't find an IT role when I left uni. So went into what some have heard me say before as the dark side of accountancy for a little bit, and then kind of flip backwards and forwards between data transformation and finance. And I think the one thing that underpins all of that is data. So if you're working in a finance role, essentially what you're doing is you're making data available for people to make decisions on. If you're working in a technology or a direct data field, you're doing the same. You're enabling people to access data and make better decisions using that data. So the two sort of profession routes are not actually dissimilar in terms of what they're trying to achieve. It's just the way and the processes that you're doing that are a little bit different to get to that route. So I've always found that they work really well together. Most of my career has been in public sector. I kind of fell into energy sector when I came into this role, and I think seeing different sectors and different parts of industry, I think is really important when you're working in that kind of transformation field and you're trying to do things differently.
And just interested in, like, because it's a unique-ish title, right? Does that dual responsibility, kind of walking the tightrope, give you that unique perspective that allows you to kind of do more at NSTA, but also help others and advise? Like, a lot of your work sits around that piece of driving better decisions through data. I mean, do you feel that, that you're quite well placed seeing as much as you do?
I think so. I think that there's always the conversation, if you speak to CIOs, about where should strategy around data sit. Should it sit in the business or should it sit in the technology team? The kind of role I'm doing, I think for me, it doesn't sit in either or. It's a collective responsibility delivering business strategy. You can use data and digital tools to enable that, but the outcomes you're looking for are always aligned with the purpose of the organization. So for me, it doesn't really matter what your job title is. It's how you go about it, how you enable teams to be able to deliver what they need to deliver in terms of value for the outcomes that the organization is looking for.
And feel free to not answer, but do you feel like energy is in front or behind on the adoption curve of some of this stuff?
I think it's really, I'm not going to not answer, but I think it's a really difficult question to answer because I think different parts of it are probably ahead and behind in different areas, right? So, I mean, the energy sector is essentially a STEM-based sector. So you've got engineers, you've got geologists. Most of those professions are used to working with data and understand the importance of it. So to a certain extent, I think there are some elements that are ahead there, but also it's a sector that's been around for a very long time. And that means that generally, organizations working in the sector have quite a lot of legacy, and where you've got legacy systems, you've got more things you've got to think about. So you can't necessarily just build a native AI app if you've got a legacy behind you that is where you're trying to extract your data from. So I think there are some parts where the industry is ahead. There are some parts because of that legacy where perhaps we're lagging a little bit in terms of some other sectors. So the important bit for me is jumping out of sector and getting knowledge from other areas is really important so that you don't stay in that same mindset of one particular sector at a time.
And I think it's a space where, like, you can learn a lot from elsewhere and see, like, less regulated or maybe less mission critical industries that have tried things out, made some mistakes and learned some stuff. I do deeply believe that, like, that energy sector domain knowledge does pay dividends if you have it, but there is a lot to be learned from kind of going a bit broad and beyond. The kind of the other side of the coin for me is that I think sometimes energy is a little bit unimaginative in what can be achieved with technology. Like, when people come to you asking about the balance between regulation, innovation, guardrails versus competition, how do you walk the tightrope there?
I think it can be a challenging one. So firstly, I think if you're trying to transform anything, getting a variety of views, variety of experience is the way you do it, because you're trying to do something different. So if we're talking about digital transformation or the use of data, it's really important to go out of sector and gather bits of experience. I think the sticking with the technology view of just one area is never going to get you to where you need to be. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that we don't stay within our own little bubble and within our own mindset. So some of the things we've done through the Offshore Energy Digital Strategy Group, for example, has enabled us to broaden that. So, for example, we weren't just thinking about the oil and gas sector. We've worked with colleagues that are working in offshore wind. The experiences are different. They're similar. The overall purpose is very much aligned, but actually there are different experiences and pockets of experience. So I think bringing those together and having those conversations is a really important way that you can start to do things in a different way.
And I want to touch on, because in doing transformation, I think it's always useful to have like flagship, like lighthouse case studies to talk about. And I mean, you're sitting on one, right? At NSTA, you built the National Data Repository, which is no mean feat. I mean, would you like to kind of expand on what it is, what it does, how it works, what were all the kind of great fun things we learned along the way?
Yeah, sure. So when I first came in, I said there had been a review called the Wood Review that had said that data should be at the heart of everything that the regulator does. But data across the sector was quite siloed. So we looked at that. We worked with the industry organisations that have been maintaining a form of the National Data Repository in the past, and looked at how we could learn from that and leverage the success today and make it even better. So one of the challenges was at that point that it was a membership model. You needed to be a member to be able to access the data. And from our point of view, opening up the data to a wider usage base was a key. So whether that is new entrants into the sector who didn't have the historic data, or whether that was academia who were looking to do research around carbon storage or offshore wind. So we said, how can we take this model and the data set that was there and actually take that to the next level? So we brought it into public ownership. So at that point, it had a smaller data volume. We're now up to 1.8 petabytes of data. We were able, because of the timing, to make that a cloud native. So we built that directly in the cloud, which then made it much more accessible to people. And having that in one place means that anyone, if you wanted to, you could log on to the NDR and access data. It breaks down that element of the silos so that the data is all retained in one place. It means industry doesn't have to retain the data themselves separately if they don't want to. What we've really seen from that is then a step change in terms of data usage. So, for example, when our colleagues launched the first UK carbon storage licensing round, we saw NDR data downloads increase by 20-fold on the day of the licensing round. So there's a very clear link there that to enable you to build the carbon storage industry, you need to be able to access data that helps you to understand the subsurface and the geology of the basin. That hopefully then as an outcome will enable us as a country to capture up to 10% of the UK's annual emissions. So for me, the importance of having that data set in place, in one place that's easily accessible, is we're really starting to see that in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to drive as an organisation.
I think it's amazing. So actually, I think episode 2 or 3 of the Hypercube podcast, we had David Lecor on to talk about building the National Data Repository. It was an incredible chat, and I've used it as a discussion point for years in my strategy pieces and the advisory work I do, because I find it really interesting. The actual data that you're holding on to cost millions to produce, like some of the probably the most expensive data we've produced, right, as in any industry. And you've made it public and you've made it accessible. You've opened it up to universities, to researchers, to whoever. Incredible stuff. But we don't seem to be able to do that for like smaller data sets that would also be useful. And I think like I talk to other industries that are adjacent, so things like the grid infrastructure or telco, and I think like there are other analog data sets like that it's a physical monopoly. Effectively, it's like there's a physical thing, and once the data's there, the data's there. Why can't we make it into something once the benefit of reaping it 20, 30 years ago has been had? Why can't we make it public, bring it together? And I think the national grid's my transmission network and things my favorite, because everyone's got different models, different views, different things. Some of this you can't share, but everyone's trying to piece together their own forecasts, their own understanding of what's going on. It was like, why can't we learn some lessons from what you've done at NSTA? Because once you democratize is a word I hate, but once you democratize access to it and like usership of it, you unlock all these other benefits, and it becomes, I mean, I imagine it could become self-perpetuating in people being interested in it, finding new insights. What are some of the more fun things that have kind of come out the back of it that was unexpected benefits maybe?
So for me, I think one of the unexpected benefits is bringing the conversations around the value of data really round to the board tables of industry. Because I think if you went to any data manager throughout the last 30, 40 years, they're all going to say there's huge amounts of data, value that you can add from data. What I think having the NDR in place and the ability to access and use that data in the conversations we do around regulation has lifted that conversation up to a strategic level. And that wasn't the purpose of putting in the NDR. That was very much that practical purpose that I talked about. But the change you can make now with the combination of the use of data and the potential of some of the emerging technologies, those conversations are happening around the board table. And I don't think they would have been happening in the sector in the same way if we didn't have the ability to surface those large quantities of data. The other thing I think I'd say, in terms of going back to the conversation about learning from other sectors, so the water sector has an open data project that is slightly different, but works along the same sort of principles of what we've done with the NDR. There are other projects as well that are looking at open data. So I think people are getting there in terms of understanding the balance between the commercial value in the data for companies and then how much you can take that to the next level if you leverage that across an industry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, actually, because the AI hype cycle that we're in, everyone's going, no. So it is like there's a significant step change in technology, bloody blah. It is great. Some great things are happening. But again, it's like, for me, you've got kind of FOMO driven development going on, and you've got C-suite saying, I need an AI and all that, and it's a great excuse to kind of shoehorn in all the medicine that they need to take around like data platforms and stuff. It's like there's a new thing to be excited by, and I think it's interesting because it's analogous to what you're saying there. Not every business needs to build something of the scale of the National Data Repository, but seeing it and interacting with it kind of opens up the field of possibilities for what could we do that would enable us to achieve a bit more, and what good ideas can we kind of build upon. I guess so. Like, you've career history in digital transformation and understanding this sort of stuff. What does good digital transformation look like? Because it doesn't have to be at this scale, right? Like, what does good look like in most industries and in this industry?
Yep. I think it's really difficult to have one answer to that, because it is going to be different depending on your context. But I think good digital transformation is about enabling people to do things in a different way. So starting off with sort of the mission or purpose of your organization, looking at that, identifying things that people say are the worst part of their day, right? Everybody should be able to answer that question. What have you come home and you complain to your other half or a friend about? Digital transformation solves those challenges. I think the flip side of what poor digital transformation looks like is how can we use, where we need an AI, the bit that you were saying in terms of boards saying we need an AI, we need the metaverse, we need blockchain. We can come up with all sorts of technologies over the years where people have said we need to use this. That's not good digital transformation. Good digital transformation is trying to solve that problem, whether that's an individual, let's make your day better, or whether that's a system wide in terms of how can we add more value from this. That's what the good looks like in digital transformation. That's going to be different based on your organization, based on your sector. But I think it's thinking about the problems we're trying to solve and using digital and data to solve them rather than the flip side to that.
I think you touched on another point, like the tech for tech's sake, and let's buy NFTs and all this stuff. They have their place in some businesses, right? Often I find that there is a huge disconnect between the technologists within any given business, whether it be a technology business or like where technology is just serving kind of the main business purpose. There's usually a disconnect in what's being built and like the top level strategic objectives, and people often find that like they'll just cop out and say, oh well, it's too hard and we don't understand how technology links to the business strategy. How do you bring people on that journey where actually you lead with the business strategy to kind of align technology decisions?
So I think the starting point is don't talk about technology or data, right? Those of us that have come up through a technical route, we love a good acronym, we love a good techie term. It makes us sound like we know what we're talking about, but it also makes us unapproachable. And it means that if you're looking at delivering a business strategy, people don't necessarily know what you mean, and therefore they're not going to listen to you. So I think the starting point is don't talk in technical terms. If you've got that business strategy, you know what your purpose is. So I talked about our purpose as an organization at the start. We've got 3 clear points: energy security, emissions reduction, and accelerating the energy transition. Those aren't technology points. They're not data points, but none of those can happen without those tools and that value that can push forward those objectives. So I think talking in technology teams about delivery dates of a platform is important from a project sense, But I think when you're talking wider than the direct tech team, it's talking about how that can meet and help those outcomes. So when you ask me about the National Data Repository, talking about the fact that that can potentially lead to the capture of 10% of UK's annual emissions, that's not a technology priority, that's an organizational business priority. And I think we potentially in tech roles talk too much on the data and the technology and don't talk as much on in the strategic sense.
I completely agree. I think I'll say to customers is that if you could like have a magic wand and this just worked, you probably would go for it if it was like the right price and the right risk appetite. But I think one thing I often struggle with personally is thinking how, like, when you give that kind of advice, which I think is right, human-led, centric, sometimes you do run the risk of, we'll stay with the status quo and don't actually use like the best technologies that are there for what you're trying to do, because it is hard to understand it all and you have to kind of be submerged in it. How do you balance that, and like how do you drive, I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you drive data and digital into the core strategy, not as just like a secondary piece?
Yeah. So we've just published our second data and digital strategy. So that's a 5-year strategy. Our starting point for that was those 3 buckets of priorities of what we're trying to achieve as an organization. Was one end we started that at. The other end was the look back at projects and priorities that we've delivered in the term of the first strategy. You know, the good, let's get in a room and put up as many post-it notes as we possibly can, cover every surface. We've all done that. And bringing into kind of workshops the whole team to say, okay, what have you delivered in the last 5 years? What do we need to deliver for the next 5 years? We approach that from different ways, so different styles of workshop to get different voices in the room and different ideas. And then I think the important thing is bringing those two together, so closing the gap. So there are some things that are never going to feature in the business strategy that are essential in the technology strategy. So cybersecurity, for example, and underlying the conversations about infrastructure and user ID services and all those good things that you need in a system to be able to enable people to do the other aspects. Making sure that business strategy has a key point in it that says data will be at the heart of everything we do, for me, then enables those two to be linked and pull them together. So I think it's thinking in the practical sense, but also thinking in the strategy sense. Explaining to colleagues that perhaps aren't in the tech area how and why what the tech team are doing enables them to do other things, I think is a real key part of that strategy process.
And that's such a fine balance, because like you see young enthusiastic consultants come in and they want to change every business they go into, and like you do have to say, well, just be careful, because sometimes you're going up to very experienced, very capable people and telling them, see, the way you've done this for 20 years is actually wrong, and here's the better way. And you have to be mindful of people don't knowingly make the wrong decisions or suboptimal decisions, right? Like everything's got a reason, and you have to be careful. 9 times out of 10, I find the difference is in the context of the business, and there's like something trapped in the nuance around the experience. But yeah, so it's always good fun seeing like the first kind of wave of consultants straight out of whatever they've been in before get bashed off the shores of like experience and time and legacy of different businesses.
And things change, right? Context changes. So it might be that something was the right decision at the time, but the context of the world has moved on. There are new priorities. So as an organization, we started off as the Oil and Gas Authority, and we have evolved into North Sea Transition Authority. Our role has evolved during that time. That means our priorities have changed. That means some of the solutions that we might have delivered a number of years ago are now no longer fit for purpose, not because they were wrong, but because the context has changed. I think sometimes you need to take brave decisions in a tech role and leadership role. So off the back of that strategy we launched in January, we've essentially created what we're calling our foundation year. We are going back and we are looking at the foundations of everything we do in the digital and data space. So we're saying, do we have the right foundations? Possibly not. They were good at the time, but they're creaking, like, you know, the foundations of a house. So we talk a lot about shoring up the foundations. We're going to shore up those foundations, and that will enable us then to deliver in a different way going forward. But that means that we have to potentially pause some of our developments because we don't know that the underlying data architecture, for example, is right and fit for the future. So we're reviewing that, and we're doing that in a way that gives ourselves the time to be able to review that well in the context we are in now. And then we can take that forward and potentially move at a quicker pace in some of our developments in the future.
Yeah, I think I love that. And you do have to take bets and you have to take brave steps. So many customers of ours get stuck trying to find the perfect first step. And they spend like 2 years analyzing like every possible permutation and optimization step they could go for. And actually the value's in short, sharp steps, like sort of being able to change quickly and building up the delivery engine to make it easy to keep that going, which you kind of lose out on from trying to big plan up front, like do it all perfect
Absolutely.
at once.
And I think the agile terminology has fallen a little bit out of favor in recent years, but I think that move from that really waterfall kind of stage gate approach is one that we should continue to do, right? Working with your customers and your users in small bite-sized chunks, that means you can then pivot fairly quickly if you need to, if a different priority comes up, I think is a core element of agile that I think is still as relevant today.
100%. And I think like we're living through, I believe, a fundamental step change in the way all knowledge work is done, right? And 5 years from now, it will be unrecognizable for a lot of industries. Like my workflows today, my personal workflows today are nothing like they were even 6 months ago, like because the tooling is coming on so quickly and when you get familiar with them. And I think actually then to think we can plan everything up front, like you will burn so much cognitive load trying to figure that out, when actually get really good people, give them authority and guardrails and let them run at the problem, and you'll usually get most of the way to the best results without burdening people in bureaucracy and things like that. There's always a balance in industries like energy where it's like heavily regulated and it's important and all the kit's really expensive and all that. But buy ourselves the time to do that discussion and talk about that stuff as opposed to like the bureaucracy that goes with a lot of that big plan thinking.
Absolutely. I think that's key. Making sure that you're making decisions in a way that your next decision works, even if you don't know what it is. I think it's really important when you're doing any kind of transformation.
I actually think was it Barack Obama or someone? I'm terrible for misquoting people, but I'm sure it's like Barack Obama who defined leadership as being able to make decisions with like only 20% of the information and just being kind of confident and content with it. And he talks about how like everyone tries to get 60, 80, 100% of the information, whereas good leadership is being able to make a plan and go forward with the least possible information and still keep on course. It won't be a Barack Obama, it'll be someone totally different, but we'll find out after the show. Look, interested in, you do quite a few other things as well. You're quite a busy person. The Offshore Energy Digital Strategy Group, you sit as chair of that, and you're trying to shape a bit more of the wider data and digitalization discussion. What's that group's key priorities? How does it differ? What fun things are you up to?
Yeah, sure. So I think a starting point for me and why we created the group was bringing together elements of offshore energy sector into one virtual room. There've always been some real pockets of excellence on digital data, but bringing those together and learning from each other, that, as I was mentioning before, learning from different sectors, I think is really important. So that was the starting point for us. Since then, we've kind of built some data principles for the sector to use and live by. As you were just saying then, you can't always know context, you can't know what's happening, but if you have really good, strong principles behind you, then you're in a good situation to make a decision when you need to. We've got a couple of current priorities on the go. So we're lucky to get awarded some funding from DSIP for a couple of projects. So we are working on a spatial viewer, which will extend the kind of access to geospatial data across the sector a bit wider. And if that works, then we can potentially add in more organizations as well. And then we're working on a proof of concept for a chatbot to work across those platforms. So one of the challenges that we were told when we held a workshop from people was the data is great when they can access it and they know where to go to access it. it's not so good if they just don't know which portal to go to. So the idea is to have a chatbot that will enable people to access that data better without changing the underlying infrastructure of all the portals. And then the final one I was going to mention on that was around digital data skills. So we did a survey a few years ago, and that showed us that in the sector felt, or 2/3 of the sector felt, that they had the skills that they needed for digital and data from existing technologies. That dropped to 1/3 for what was then defined as emerging technologies. Now, that's out of date. We really need to understand that a bit better. So we have literally, actually, as of today, gone live with a survey to the sector to ask people about the skills. So what are the skills that you need in the sector now? How good are the skills? And we're looking to identify what that gap is, and then we can start to close that gap and work together on that. So that's what we're working on at the moment. So some interesting things.
It's amazing. I think it's great seeing, because again, it's like in a position where you can do that cross-cutting stuff and kind of start to lead, like carve a bit of a path through what's going on and show, like, help people collaborate and things like that. I always think that a lot of the problems end up being like sort of story as old as time. It's like access to the data and skills is always the one, right? I think especially in energy. I want to get onto another body that you chair, one that's very close to my heart, the Data Lab and AI Scotland. Now, for those in the audience that haven't heard me bang on about the Data Lab, could you please explain who are you and what do you do and what's AI Scotland?
Yeah, sure. So the Data Lab is Scotland's Innovation Centre for Data and AI. It's hosted by the University of Edinburgh, part of the Innovation Centre programme that's funded by the Scottish Funding Council. And essentially our roles to foster innovation through collaboration, building skills, growing talent, and championing Scotland's data science community. Really similar to some of the things I've just been talking about with an NSTA hat on. So helping Scotland to maximise value from data, and more so now also from AI, and enabling Scotland to be at the heart of that kind of data powered future. So a really interesting organisation, I would say. If people are working in a data field and they're not yet a member, please do join the 8,000 members worldwide that are now part of the Data Lab community.
Yeah, shame on you if you're not already a member. You should be. No, it's incredible. Like, I've been in and around the Data Lab for many years now, and the people that come through, we've hired people that we've met through the Data Lab events. I would highly recommend it, not just for Scottish people and Scottish businesses as well. It's a very global community that the team have built. And I guess one of the things that the Data Lab does really very well is that skills piece and a whole host of like executive education, on the ground training, funding of studentships and MSCs. Do you want to talk a bit about some of the really successful programs that you've run?
Yeah, sure. So you were saying not just Scotland, right? So there's 8,000 members over 100 countries. So it's quite broad in terms of involvement. Data Labs help support over 300 SMEs in data and AI adoption. So through funding, technical supports, placements, events, networking, access to jobs boards. I mean, there's so much there that if you haven't got involved in. You mentioned AI Scotland. So the AI Scotland programme was launched in March, and the Data Lab are going to be a key partner in the delivery of some of those aspects, particularly around skills. Because I think we touched earlier on the energy sector skills, but I think just generally skills in the data world are becoming more and more important. And that's really at the heart of what the Data Lab does.
Yeah, because I think it's really hard. Like, I've got so many friends, like one of my best friends is academic, and it's really very hard for universities to deliver cutting edge, like industry requirement courses, if you know what I mean. Like, the time it takes to write a university accredited course, get it through testing, get it launched, take students through it, just the nature of it, like even a 12-week course at the moment is probably too slow for the pace of change in some of the tooling, right? So I think periphery organizations and other routes to acquiring those skills just becomes paramount, because there's still a great place universities in the education system. I'd never boohoo that. But I think when you're in it, kind of double-edged sword, because it's hard, and so there's lots of other things out there. But if you're in the world of work and you've been out of university for a long time, it's not really that big a disadvantage, because everyone's kind of level playing field, trying to find institutions like the Data Lab to help bring them on that way. And I think Yeah, look, I could bang on about the Data Lab for all day. It's great, like bringing people into tech, creating communities, and just helping people connect the dots and find a way into the industry. It is brilliant.
Yeah.
It
And I
kind of
think
all
things like the mentoring program, right? So you can sign up to a member of the community free of charge and join the mentorship program. So if you're working in a data profession for many years, then you might want to be a mentor. But if you're working in a career where you're using data, you want to understand data better, and you haven't yet decided put the data label on your own role, it's a great way that you can get access some of the skills and experience for people that have been working in the profession for many years.
Yeah, and then last point, and I will move on, but exactly that, the mentorship piece, it reminds me as well, even just the community as a whole, like for lots of people, you might be the only data person within your organization. You might have been given the database or given the Power BI reports, right? So where do you go to for help? Well, come and find like-minded individuals that just like nerding out about this stuff. I remember like used to do like the visualization challenges once a month and all this stuff. Like come find other people that have maybe trod this path in a totally different industry, but will help you think about skills, think about events to go to and things like that. And it all kind of orbits that central theme. I think is like so very important in energy, in data, is that change through people element that you've spoken about in the past. Like tech's the easy bit, right? But probably my favorite catchphrase. But actually, if you can convince all the right people to do the right stuff at the right time, the tech will sort itself, right? How have you seen that play out? And what's your approach to kind of kickstarting that process?
So I've probably alluded to a bit of it already in the conversation, but I think the starting point for me is really understanding the purpose of what you're trying to do, whether that's in an organization or whether that's in your own life, right? Understanding what you're trying to achieve is the key starting point. I think then that part about what's the worst part of your day, what doesn't work, what's the challenge that's facing us, and thinking about those two things before you start to talk about the data and tools that you've got to hand. So you mentioned earlier about people jumping to AI. AI is the solution, but we don't know what the problem is. That's the third step for me, trying to look at the data and the digital tools that help you close that gap between what you're trying to achieve and what the worst part of your day or your challenge is. And that's all about people having those conversations, thinking about ways you can do things differently whilst using that toolkit of digital and data. That's where the people part of transformation is really important. Yes, you need to understand the tools, but don't start with that understanding. Start with the understanding of what people are trying to do.
Yeah, and I would love that, because when you do that right, you get into like a pull-driven system as opposed to a push that you're like, people are asking you for the tech as opposed to you force-feeding them like the newest, latest and greatest. So do you have any predictions or forecasts looking ahead? Like what's the outlook for data-driven energy systems?
Wow, that's a big question to end on, isn't it? I think for me, this goes back to the conversation we were having about tech being part of the business strategy. So I'd like to see the energy system having that as more integral. I think at the moment, even though we all talk about data being at the heart of things, it is generally on the edge of strategy. I think that really does need to be in the center, and that makes it much more integral to driving the energy systems rather than the point where I think we are at the moment, which is all about understanding the energy system. So I think a bit of a change in the role as it evolves.
Well, thank you very much for your time today. Before I let anyone leave, I always just like to ask if people in the audience want to find out more about you, about NSTA or any of the bodies that you are working with, or if there's anything you'd like to promote or plug, where should we send them?
So for the NSTA, nstauthority.co.uk is best to look at the website. For the Data Lab, thedatalab.com, but also they're quite vocal on LinkedIn. And then me personally, LinkedIn is probably the best place. And I'm straightforward, Nic Granger on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you once again for coming on today. It's been great to chat to you. And I'm sure I'll bump into you again at some sort of community event up here soon.
Great to talk to you, Adam. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you once again for listening to the Hypercube Energy Podcast. As always, if you have any feedback or comments or you want to get involved, please get in touch. And if you want to find out more about what's happening in data and AI across the energy sector, please join the Beyond Energy community. And I look forward to speaking to you soon.